Good evening, everybody. My name's Marcos Staffney. I'm the Executive Director for the Montshire Museum of Science, and I'm really excited to have you here this evening for our Montshire Talks Frankenstein 200 program, where we look at Frankenstein through text and image. This is part of a national celebration where we are celebrating Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. It's the 200th anniversary of the publishing of the book, and we partnered with Rauner Library to present a really just spectacular array of books and media that have either been inspired by the book Frankenstein, or are inspirational pieces of Frankenstein, or help to inform the time period in which Mary Shelley wrote the book. So I think we're going to have a delightful evening tonight, and I'd like to introduce Morgan Swan, who has so carefully picked these amazing books this evening as he takes us on a really amazing journey all through these books.
Great, thank you, Marcos.
Thanks, Morgan.
So thank you all for coming. So my name is Morgan Swan. I am the Special Collections Education and Outreach Librarian. It's a very long title, but what it means is I get to have fun finding cool things for you guys to look at. So when Marcos contacted me and asked me if I wanted to do this, I was like, yeah. And I've had a great time pulling some materials from our collections. The library here, if you don't already know, we're the primary repository for the rare book collection, the manuscript collections, and the archives for the college. We have about 140,000 rare books. We have about 7 linear miles of manuscript and archival material, millions of individual items. All of that is available for you guys to come look at anytime you want. You don't have to make an appointment. You don't have to call ahead. Anytime we're open, you can just walk in and say, I want to see something cool. You don't have to know what that is. We'll figure it out. We'll ask you some questions. Yeah, we'll do our best to find what you're interested in and bring it for you. And in about 5 minutes or so, you can be looking at it out here. What I've done today is I've gone through the collection. I've tried to find a few interesting groupings of material, because that's often what we do when we have classes here. And so I'm going to walk briefly through the different groupings and the individual items in each group and tell you a little bit about them to contextualize them. That's probably going to take at most about half an hour. And then that's going to give you guys about half an hour to actually explore the materials yourself. You're welcome to take photos. You will be able to turn the pages and look at the materials. The only thing I will ask is if it's in a cradle, which is what we call these, just leave it in the cradle because we want to protect the spine. Because especially in the 19th century, books are really poorly made and it's really easy for them to just crack. Okay, so anyway, the first group, I should also mention, I do this, I have a spiel, but you're not gonna knock me off my stride if you interrupt me to ask a question. It's not gonna disturb me. I really enjoy a conversation or discussion more than just sort of me blathering on, lecturing at you. So feel free to interrupt. Yeah, I may not have an answer for your question, but I'll do my best. Okay, so the first thing I wanted to show you guys, this is really cool. This is the, we don't have a first, sadly, we don't have a first edition from 1818, but we have the next best thing, which is the first illustrated edition from 1831. And so that's what this is. And here you see this is the first engraving, the first visualization of the monster or the creature. I feel like monster is like the un-PC way. I keep saying it. So the creature. So here you have the creature waking up, and he's stunned, trying to figure out what's going on, and then you have Frankenstein, who's terrified, obviously running away from this, in disgust. What has he done? The cool thing about this is one of the things about this is that this is done by von Holst, Theodor von Holst, who was he's the parent. He's the son of. Sorry? This is the illustrator? Yeah, the illustrator. Sorry, the illustrator, the engraver, Theodor von Holst, he's the son of Russian immigrants who came to England. And then he actually went to the Royal Academy and trained under Henry Fuseli. Fuseli was a really well-known romantic artist who inspired a lot of the romantic poets of that period. And in particular, he has this one painting called The Nightmare, where there's this gargoyle-ish, impish sort of creature crouched on top of a woman who's passed out or unconscious. And what's really cool is there's actually a little picture of it on this version of the Frankenstein, the annotated Frankenstein. I've got a picture of it up here in the corner. So if you guys want to check that out later, you can. Marcos brought these three in. I have a couple of other. The first group basically is Frankenstein through time. Okay, so I've got a lot of different versions, not a lot, but several, about 4 different versions of Frankenstein. He was so kind to bring in another 3, right? And one of the things we really like to do one of the reasons I brought these out is because we really like to think of, here at Rauner, we like to think about the book as an object. And what does the object tell you about what the culture in which it was created thought about the contents, right? So this doesn't, I mean, it's worth illustrating, which means that's extra money. You're paying an artist to do that, right? It's not cheap, but there's nothing really fancy about the exterior. And then
how many illustrations are
just those.
Just those two?
Yeah, pretty sure. Pretty sure. I could be. I said that so confidently. No. I'm pretty sure that was it though. Yeah, it's not illustrated all the way throughout. You just have like sort of you have the illustration at the beginning because it was very expensive.
Was that common at that time?
Yeah. You usually have like a frontispiece.
Yeah.
And that was like, ooh, this is nice. Or sometimes the portrait of the author. But usually that would be the only illustration because it would cost extra money. And the more illustrations you put in, the higher the cost of the book, and then the fewer people who can afford to buy it.
How much would a book like that cost?
A novel in the early 19th century probably would have cost about half a week's wage of like a normal sort of middle-class person.
And what was the reception of this book?
I don't know that much about the reception. I know that there's a letter. There's a letter from. Well, there's a letter from Percy. It was mixed because there's a letter from Percy Shelley, her husband, to her father, saying that he had heard that her book's kind of getting trashed in the like there's an kind of review. But he said, but I've been hearing other positive things. So I think your mileage may vary. I think it depended upon. But obviously it was popular enough for them to come back and make an illustrated copy. 14 years later? Yeah, no, 13 years later. So the next one I want to show you. This is actually from the 1930s. So we're jumping ahead quite a bit, about 100 years. Yeah, but this is. So you say Frankenstein or the Modern Prometheus, which is the alternate title. This is kind of a fascinating book. It's like wrapped. I don't know if this is like. It's a cloth binding with a leather strip, and it's a really beautiful book. It's got gold on the top, and then it's got these decal edges, which means it hasn't been trimmed. So it's like, ooh, this is like nice paper, like fancy paper. And then this is not vellum actually, but it is high quality paper. And then what they've done is they've gone through and put. I wish I had like a Frankenstein on vellum. That would be like brilliant. To have a copy of Frankenstein on animal skin, that would like be so great. But no, sadly. If I have a book artist come and ask me what kind of thing we would buy, that's what I'm telling you. Yeah, here we go. So this is filled. It's a beautiful book. It's filled with all these like colored illustrations that were commissioned specifically for this volume, right? So this was made by the Limited Editions Club. And limited edition, if any of your members, I'm sorry, but the limited.
American?
Yeah. Limited Editions Club, basically what you did is you paid like several $1,000s a year to be a member, and you would get a couple of these sent to you every year. And they're always, the whole shtick was they were limited. They were only printed like a small amount. So there are 1,500 copies made for the members of the Limited Edition Club. And then this is number 560, and it's signed by the artist. Right?
We also
Who's the
the
artist?
type be the same as was the original.
The type?
Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes what they'll do is
My former wife used to write the newsletter for me. The reason I know that.
Oh, cool. Really? For the Limited Editions
Yeah.
Club? Oh, I think we have like every volume, and I think we have their newsletters too. That's crazy. Yes, Limited Editions Club at the Walpole Printing Office in New Rochelle, New York. Is it Ernest Henry? Oh, no, Everett Henry is the illustrator. Okay, so this is This is kind of a cool. Obviously, there's some value here, right? Like this is if you're going to spend a lot of money making a very fancy, like limited release, like art commission just for this volume, then the text that's in there must be some value to it, right? It must be considered a classic or an important text, or they wouldn't do that.
Oh, sorry.
It looks like they could have been part of a set. Were they all bound the same way?
Oh yeah, they were all. I mean, they wouldn't always look the same on the spine, but they were all sort of roughly the same size, I think, and sort of the.
I don't remember that, but I don't think I saw the book set might show you.
They all look distinct and unique in their own way. Sorry.
It's meant to be a collection so that your library makes you look like you're very learned because you have these beautiful editions.
Exactly. So they would all need to play nicely with each other on the shelf.
Interesting.
Yeah. There's this great line. That's a really. I'm sorry, I'm like digressing here, but that's like a really old idea too. Like if you guys have read like A Great Gatsby, there's this great scene. There's a party at his house, and he's there. This drunk owlish man is in the library, and he's raving about the book because the wall's just covered with books. It's like, it's brilliant. None of them are even cut, which means he hasn't read any of them, right? They're just there. They're just there so he can look smart. So some people who are uncharitable say that's kind of what the limited editions club's all about. But anyway, the next thing we have an amazing script collection here. The Universal Studios, an alumnus back in the 20s, Walter Wanger. He was a really big studio exec, and so he donated this massive collection of original scripts.
So cool.
Yeah, right.
Where's that?
These are all from the 40s, like 30s, 40s, I mean, some of the 50s too. So this is actually one of the scripts from The Ghost of Frankenstein, the movie. I haven't seen it, but well, it was the fourth one, right? Because you had Frankenstein, you had Bride of Frankenstein, Son of Frankenstein, then you had Ghost of Frankenstein. What's interesting here is that there was the original title was There's Always Tomorrow.
Oh, that must include the alternate ending.
Yeah, and so they scratched that out, and they were in Ghost of Frankenstein.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm assuming it includes the stuff that didn't get made in or got cut out. The
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. You'll have to read it later to find out.
shot originally different dialogue, but
And then in the back they have like an image of the monster and like a review from the New York Times of the movie.
Was that maybe you don't know this, but maybe you know, Marcos, was that the first, the movie, was it the first instance of Frankenstein being depicted as this like monster and not as a sort of more humanoid
So
creature?
the Karlovian
Right.
version, Karloff, Boris Karloff with Frankenstein. Although no, there was a silent movie that came out before that where he does look like this strange, disheveled creature.
And that was an Edison-made film. So Edison Studios made that. Thank you, 1910. You can watch that on YouTube very easily. So it's about a 17-minute film. 10. Thank you, 10. But it is,
Aficionados,
yeah, I know. So, but it is worth watching, and that's it's actually a much more grotesque depiction of the creature versus the Boris Karloff version. So.
Pre-code, but.
So the final Frankenstein version I have here, although obviously Marcos has some great ones like this. This is the Norton Critical Edition, and the cover image is the Polar Sea. It was painted in 1824 by Caspar David Friedrich, he's like a he's a real well-known romantic poet. I mean, not poet, artist. And I love this because obviously it's the movie. The book begins in the Polar Sea and it ends in the Polar Sea, and a lot of people. Yeah, in the movie, I guess.
well, they
But,
had,
yeah. And here you have some, this is a great cover, the Penguin Classic. Mm-hmm. So, you have this. Right. I almost feel like that's more of like, I mean, obviously, like in the book, he is like 8 feet tall. He's this huge creature, right? But at the same time, he's more man than zombie robot. And I love this one. I'd never seen this one until Marcos brought this in. The new annotated one. This is the one with the introduction by Guillermo del Toro. Yeah, and it's got some great images. It's got Mary Shelley, and it actually has an image of that first appearance of him in the Edison film. So you guys can check those out.
Is that a guide or is it a reprint?
It's an actual novel, but it has like notes in like the margins. So it's got like a.
Did you see The Shape of Water, obviously?
Well,
No, I haven't seen it yet.
Oh
No.
my God.
Yeah, I hear it's good. Yeah, I haven't. So this is a 1983 version of Frankenstein. Yeah, I'm losing all the. I think this is a promotional poster, maybe. Oh yeah, this is like the prospectus, which is kind of cool. Like, would you like to buy this? From Pennyroyal Press, Northampton, Massachusetts. And this is printed in West Hatfield, looks like. This is a beautiful edition, right? Like this is the leather bound. It has an amazing box it comes in, and then you have these beautiful illustrations. The sort of the Gothic fraktur type script, So this, in some ways, it's kind of campy, but in others, it's kind of great. You have these beautiful woodcuts by Barry Moser, who's a really, really famous illustrator, and the whole thing is filled with them. These just amazing drawings, and even when you're not on the drawings, it's just so crisp. The text block, it's just a beautiful book, right?
When was this published?
This is 1983. Yeah. And we actually have some of Barry Moser's papers here, which is kind of cool. So we have some of his original drawings, not of Frankenstein, but of other ones. So that's sort of like different versions of Frankenstein, how society or culture has interpreted it. This side from here on out, I sort of think of it as like the inspirations or the influences on Shelley, on Mary Shelley. So right here we have, this is a first edition of The Vindication of the Rights of Woman by her mother, Mary Wollstonecraft, who was sort of like a proto-feminist. I mean, she wasn't sort of, she was a proto-feminist. There's this great part in here where she says something about nonsense. Like trying to say, oh, women can't be as as well learned or as smart as men. She's like, yeah, whatever. So her mother was Mary Wollstonecraft. Mary Shelley's father was William Godwin. Godwin actually. This is the first edition of his book, Political Justice. Godwin, he was the first sort of modern political philosopher to espouse anarchism or anarchy as a legitimate political perspective. He wasn't like a rebel in the sense of like, let's burn everything down like French Revolution style, but he was definitely like, we need to challenge and uproot and re-examine the structures of government because they have lost their moral center. And so we need to be in conversation about how we can reunite government with morality or ethical behavior. Yeah. But so because of that though, he sort of all the romantics, who are all about emotion and sort of rejection of traditional authority, guys like Percy Shelley and Byron and those guys, they loved him. So he sort of became like the intellectual heart. It's like the Noam Chomsky. He like sort of became this like the heart of this movement or this resistance to sort of the traditional structures of government. And Percy Shelley in particular was just infatuated with him. And so he like started writing him letters like before he even met Mary. And so we've got some great. This is a copy of it's a transcription of his letters from Percy to Godwin. And he says, "The name of Godwin has been used to excite in me feelings of reverence and admiration." This is like the first letter he's written this guy, like cold calling him. "I have been accustomed to consider him a luminary too dazzling for the darkness which surrounds him. From the earliest period of my knowledge of his principles, I have ardently desired to share on the footing of intimacy that intellect which I have delighted to contemplate in its emanations." Wow. So you can imagine if you get a letter from like that from a young man. And then things went south though, because once he ran off with Mary, while he was still married to another woman, Godwin was not very happy with that. And here's a letter though from July, summer of 1818, and he's talking about he and Mary reading Ariosto together, and she has a competent knowledge of Latin. She's now reading Livy, so he's talking about all these texts that they're exploring together. And at the end of the letter he says, "I hear that poor Mary's book is attacked most violently in the Quarterly Review. We have heard some praise of it, and among others an article of Walter Scott's in Blackwood's magazine." So Walter Scott's praising the book, even if some people are running it down. Then a couple of things here, just from the Romantic poets. One, A Prometheus Unbound, which is a poem by Percy Shelley, which definitely has political overtones. And this is a couple of things here that are really cool. One is this is the first edition of Lyrical Ballads from 1798. Mostly you associate that with Wordsworth, because William Wordsworth was the driving force behind it. But it's also the first time that the Rime of the Ancient Mariner shows up in print. So it's kind of cool, and it's right here at the front. So you get right at the beginning, you get Coleridge's Rime of the Ancient Mariner, she quotes it in the text. This is cool, for first edition value, but it's not really visually interesting. So I went ahead and pulled the Gustave Doré version of the Rime of the Ancient Mariner, because it's much more interesting visually. So you'll have to come check this out, because there's some pretty horrific, if you want Gothic novel-y kind of stuff, it's full of these really oh, the pathos, yeah. And then the last thing over here I have is this is the first edition, I believe it's the first edition, 1812, Childe Harold's Pilgrimage by Lord Byron. You have? Cool. This is the first time that the concept of Byronic hero appears. And Byron was with, and he's the one who sort of had the challenge. He said, "I want you all to come up with a ghost story." Right? They're all hanging out at his house at the lake, in the summer, and that's supposedly the myth is that's how that she came up with it, with the idea for Frankenstein. But Byron had, this is 1812. This is 6 years before the novel came out. Her novel came out. He sort of created this character of the Byronic hero who was sort of had self-destructive tendencies, really had an animosity towards authority or towards traditional structures, and so I think you can kind of see some of that coming out in Victor Frankenstein. I don't think that's too much of a stretch to think about the kinds of characters that the Romantic poets were beginning to embrace or create. You see some of that, I think, in Mary's writing. This side of the table, these are the books. We know some of the things that Mary was reading. These are some of the books that her characters were reading. So if you remember at the beginning, when Victor first starts getting interested in natural history, he gets obsessed with Paracelsus and Cornelius Agrippa and Albertus Magnus. Like he's like, oh, they're so amazing, and he's like just devouring them, right? And then he goes to college, and one of his professors is like, you've wasted all this time learning these people. Like you filled your mind with all this useless knowledge, and they're completely irrelevant, right? And one of the reasons that I think they said that is because actually those three figures were really invested in alchemy and astrology. And trying to find some kind of marriage between like the occult or magic and science and religion, and so that's kind of cool. That's Mary's way of sort of getting this alternate knowledge, into the story. So what I've done is we have some of those books. So I have like a 1650 English translation of Paracelsus. It has the titles of the different books in it, including Life, Death, Renewing, Transmutations, right? So you've got a lot of that. So I wonder where Victor got his ideas. Well, probably some of that's there. Unfortunately, this is not a. This is Agrippa's Cornelius Agrippa's book, like on philosophy of the occult, essentially. But it's all in Latin, which is kind of like meh. But if you have Latin, awesome. But it does have cool pictures. So. So if you want to see like interesting, strange occultic images, there's some great Vitruvian men in here too, with strange symbols surrounding them. So that's kind of cool. Check that out. And then this is really neat. This is it's a manuscript. It's all done by hand. It's a manuscript on paper. Someone went through and essentially transcribed all these different various treatises and tracts and pamphlets having to do with alchemy and astrology, all in one place. And so you've got some really cool hand-drawn designs. You've got actually a handmade volvel here, which is a rotating. So this thing turns, which is pretty cool.
When was that put together?
We don't know when it was made. We do know that this was found in a Jesuit library when a Jesuit, I don't know if you call it like a seminary or what the proper word is. It was taken over in 1767, and this was found in the library. So we don't know who made it. We know that the Jesuits had it. We don't know how it got to us, but it's at least as old as 1767. Someone has suggested maybe we should try to figure out what all the different tracts are. I know there's some of them. We know some of them. We don't know all of them. But there's some Aquinas in here. There's also Albertus Magnus, some of his alchemical philosophical treatises, which is why I pulled that, because it's really cool. So this is like Victor. This is like the foundation of Victor's insanity. Learning. And then over here we have what the monster read, the creature. I keep saying monster. I can't help it. So if you remember the monster, Victor fled. The monster had his coat, and in the pocket of his coat, the creature found all these various books, and he self-educated essentially, right? Read these things. So sorry, you guys are seeing my backside here. So what did he read? He read Paradise Lost, because that was one of the books. He read The Sorrows of Young Werther, and he read. Was it Plutarch's Lives, I think. And he also had Victor's notebooks that he found, and that's how he learned about what had happened, how he had come to be. I often wonder if Victor's notebooks didn't look kind of like this, the same kind of crazy scribbling. So here I pulled Paradise Lost. I pulled a first edition from 1667. You'll see it says it's a poem written in 10 books, although eventually it was 12 books. It was first in 10. This is an 1808 version edition, and I pulled this because the engravings are done by Henry Fuseli, who did the crouching, the nightmare creature, and was also the mentor for the guy who did the first the illustration of the monster. So you can kind of look through here and see compare their styles, if you will. The Sorrows of Young Werther, we actually have a first edition from 1774 in German. I don't know how or why we acquired this, but it's beautiful. Printed in Leipzig. And then we also have something a little closer to home. This was printed in 1826 in Concord, in New Hampshire. And it's an English version of the same book, the Sorrows of Werther. This says. So Sorrows of Werther is about this idealistic young man who falls in love. He's very emotional. He falls in love with this woman who's already engaged or married to a much older man. They have this really sad love triangle, and then finally he decides the only way this is going to resolve itself is if one of us dies, and so he kills himself. So this great sort of emotional. It was sort of written during the height of the Sturm und Drang, like proto. Pre-Romantic period in Germany, and actually this was written by Goethe, so who most of us know from Dr. Faustus, right? Or Faust rather. And it made Goethe was, I think he was like 24 at the time, and it made him an instant celebrity, made him super popular. And then finally we have for the Monsters Library. I'm just going to keep saying monster because we have Plutarch's Lives, and I have a really cool incunable. From 1496 in Venice. I'm not going to pick it up because the binding is really bad, but it's a beautiful text. It's all in Latin. And then I have an English version from 1603. So these are pretty cool. An incunable, if you don't know, incunable is any book that was printed in the first 50 years of printing in the West. So basically from Gutenberg's Bible to 1500. And it's like a really special period. It's like when printing was in its infancy, and the print culture was just beginning to sort of find its own legs. Okay, so that's the Monster and Victor, and then I couldn't help, given that the book starts and ends in the Arctic Ocean or Arctic Sea, I couldn't help but pull some material related to Arctic exploration because you guys may not know. Rauner, one of our most important collections is the Wilhelm R. Stephenson Cold Region and Polar Exploration Collection. We're probably the second best in the world. Ohio State actually has a great collection, and there's one at Cambridge. There's the Bird Center, I think, at Cambridge. But the three of us are pretty much where it's at for cold region polar exploration. So what I did is I tried to pull some cool things from the early 1800s, some of them from the 18s, a couple from the early 1820s. Just to give you a sense of the fact that, this is exploration at this time was in the public mind. It was in the zeitgeist. Everyone was thinking about this cool, like these undiscovered countries, right? And everyone was they're willing to risk their lives. They're going to risk it all. And that's what, Captain Walton in the book, he's like, oh, I'd give anything. I don't care. No life, life doesn't matter. You've got to explore. We've got to discover. And Victor's like, avoid ambition. And he's like, stop. And so he eventually turns the ship around and brings it back. But this is really cool because you can see that. And I'm trying to think what's the best map. This is a good map. I'm holding this one probably because it's the safest to hold, but it's not that great. But you can see this is the top of the world. Mm-hmm. The lines just stop, right? There's just blank space because they're we don't know. We don't know what's there, right? So there were still areas of the world that they didn't know what was there. And that's what this guy was going to discover. And I think the book makes a really interesting parallel between, because this is what starts the heroic age of exploration, Arctic exploration. From Ross and Franklin all the way up to Shackleton. Shackleton sort of closed the door on that period. But yeah, you can see this is very, it's the same kind of ideas, right? You're risking a lot to try to explore the unknown. And so when Frankenstein says, yeah, you need to watch out, they turn back and they come back, and he saves his crew's life. Sorry, I'm getting, I'm not getting emotional, I'm just getting a hoarse. Although, no.
Do you need some water?
No, I'm okay, thank you. So what's interesting too about that, I don't know if you guys remember, but in the letters in the beginning when Walton is talking, he's writing to his sister, and he says, something about like, there's going to be warm sailing and an open sea. There was a theory, because they had no idea, there was a theory that there was just like this like ring or crust of frost and ice, and if you could just get through that, the whole top of the world was just a warm, open sea because it was closest to the sun, right? So he's moving ahead thinking, we just keep going, we're going to break through this ice crust, and then we're just going to get to this nice warm polar sea, sail right over to the other side of the world, and then we're going to like cut months off of like trade, shipping, and like time and all of that. So that's kind of what was going on there. Is he was thinking he was going to find this new route across the top of the world.
And same thing with the South Pole too, right? I mean, I remember reading
South, yeah.
narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym,
Yeah, mhm.
Poe story, and he gets to the bottom, and it's like this milky white sea, and it's super warm, and it's like there's like ash falling or something strange, and it's this whole otherworldly.
It's totally unknown. It's like this fantasy, this space. Like there's no telling. It could be anything, and there's all this imagination about what could happen, what could be.
It was slightly true. When the Navy explored Antarctica back in the 50s, they found areas of open water, I think, where they had not expected them to be.
Interesting, yeah. Yeah, so that was, so it's interesting to sort of, that Mary consciously draws these parallels between like scientific exploration, like inner space, the body, but then also exploration out in the world, the last remaining few areas of the world that we don't know. The last item, and then I will be quiet and let you guys explore. This is anachronistic because it's actually from the 1870s, and it's called Arctic Regions. It was made by a photographer. His last name is Bradford, and he went on an expedition in like Greenland, basically. But it's filled with these beautiful, they're all upside down, sorry, but you can come look at them. There are these beautiful photographs of his ship among the ice. There's some amazing icebergs and ice flows. And when I was thinking about this, because I have a Norton Critical, and that was what I was reading at home like last week or the week before when I was prepping. This image is just so like sticks in my mind, and when I kept seeing this image, I immediately thought of Bradford's Arctic region. So that's kind of why I have that here, because I can almost imagine like the creature, out on one of these ice floes, like he's going out to die right after he's mourning the death of Victor.
So Morgan, thank you so much for giving us that amazing tour of all of those different texts and images that help to influence Frankenstein. You had to do a pretty quick job of it. Is there anything that you want to tell us about the process of how you selected all of those books?
Yeah, no, thank you for that. I think the way I first approach anything like this is to think about how has our society through time engaged with and perceived the work, right? Obviously, the monster or the creature takes center stage for most of us at this point. But I'm always fascinated in how books are packaged and what the packaging tells you about the value that the creator places on the content. So, for example, I have this great book that I found. This is 1983. It's printed, I think, in Vermont. Pennyroyal Press. And it's illustrated by Barry Moser, who's a really well-known contemporary illustrator. And the thing I like about this is that it's clearly, they're trying to be very academic. They're basing it on the 1818 edition and the Smith College Library, so a very specific edition. But then they're going back to this, like they have this like sort of nostalgic German like Fraktur text. And then just these beautiful images, right? And when you look at these images, you realize, oh, like this is, someone cared about this book, you know, someone loves this text. Just the cleanness of the pages, the beauty of the illustration. And you know, with the original, and also with the 1831 edition, the illustrated edition, I mean, that was sort of part of a larger series, right? So it was cool that it was illustrated for the first time, but it didn't receive that same kind of love, you know, with this leather binding. There's a special slipcase that goes in this. So you definitely can look at the different editions through time to see, wow, this is growing in influence and importance.
And what do we know about Mary Shelley's first publication? So this is the 200th anniversary of the first publication. Do we know much about the original?
I don't. I'm sure some people may, but I do know that you know, that her husband, that Percy, was desperate to get her published and to get her some recognition. I think part of that was because her father was so well known, as was her mother, and they were both well published, well known authors. So I know he was eager for her to establish a literary reputation. So the rumor is that he over-edited her first draft to some extent, and definitely controlled the entire production and release of that novel.
Now, working in collections like you do, why do you think that we think of this type of book as a special book?
This book, I think, simply because, well, it looks old. And it's meant to look old on purpose, and one of the reasons why it looks old is because it has this, you know, this leather binding. It's been tooled, especially tooled. It has the gold on the edges, you know. Every page is clean and probably typeset. It's probably not printed like on a computer or something like that. You have these original, and they paid an illustrator to create these original images based on his interpretation of the novel. Like this is special because of there's a conscious effort to make it look beautiful. It's not just about the content, it's about the object.
It's honoring the content with the aesthetics of the object as well.
Exactly.
Right? It's its own creation. I can imagine that was someone's creature.
Right, exactly. And if you look on the slipcase, it actually has like a hand of the creature like on the slipcase. So yeah, it's this thing that someone made.
So this is a beautiful work of the novel Frankenstein. What else did you bring to show or give a closer look to when it comes to books that surrounded the idea of Frankenstein?
Sure, thank you for asking. This is actually a cool. It's a manuscript. It's on paper, but it's all written by hand. This is someone went through and basically found a bunch of different alchemical and astrological texts, and they copied them out. They transcribed their own copies of them. So it's filled with these amazing, like there's a volvel that turns. Yeah. Whoa. So, you know, all these different, like.
And when was this book created?
We're not sure how it came into, how it was made. We know that at one point in 1767, a Jesuit seminary or fort, or I'm not sure, an institution was taken over, and this was found in the library.
Okay.
So it predates 1767, but we're not sure exactly if it was all created at once or over time. But you have lots of different authors in here. I think there's a treatise by Thomas Aquinas, but there's also, what was interesting for me is there's a treatise by Albertus Magnus. And one of the things that I did when I put materials together for this class was to think about, well, what are the characters reading? You know, because books were a really important part of Mary Shelley's life, her parents' life, but also her characters' lives. And so when I read the novel again, I realized that, well, Victor Frankenstein is reading all of these authors who in some ways are forbidden or they're fallen into disrepute, and the reason why is because they're obsessed with alchemy and with the occult.
It's interesting because I think a lot of people don't think of Victor Frankenstein as a young person, but he's actually very young in the book. He's going to college.
He's a college student,
he's like dipping into special collections. So here at the Rauner Library, I mean, do you ever have that as an issue where college students are going, well, I'm going to take a look at this thing, and it may lead them astray?
Yeah, well, I don't think I don't think we would ever want to corrupt
Potions and spells or
the
not.
moral. Yeah, we don't have any like Harry Potter action in here, sadly. But I will say we often have the opportunity to use our historical past to make them think about the present and engage with the present in a way they haven't before. And in a way that will hopefully make them think about how they want their future to turn out.
All right, well, I think that's what this entire series, Frankenstein 200, or the celebration of the 200th anniversary of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, is doing all across the country, which is basically helping us to look at something from the past and see how it contextualizes our contemporary thoughts and ideas about science and technology. Well, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and your expertise in putting together all of these great books. We really appreciate it.
Well, thank you. I really enjoyed this opportunity immensely.
Thanks.